You want to prevent blisters and save weight on the trail? Get the right shoes. Hey, I'm Tayson. I'm the founder here at Outdoor Vitals, and today I'm going to be talking about what I know about getting you the right shoes for backpacking. Pay attention to everything I'm about to say because shoes are one of the most important pieces of equipment that you need to purchase. They aren't something that you want to overlook because the wrong shoes can absolutely ruin a backpacking trip. So I have two stories that I want to share that stress the importance of finding the right shoe for you. The first story happened last year. It was on the fringe season of winter, so I took a pair of winter boots because it had snowed a little bit. And after about 3 days of hiking, I noticed that I was way more fatigued than a few others in my group, but I knew I was a stronger hiker then. But by the end of day 3, I was killing, and they had much lighter shoes than my boots were. So it brings me to the first most important point, which is that a pound on your feet is equivalent to 10 pounds on your back. Now, that's not exactly true. It's very hard to prove that, but equivalently, the stress that it puts on your body to have heavier shoes adds up to a lot more stress carried somewhere else on your body. So even if you were to carry it on your shoulders or on your chest or something like that, it's not gonna be as fatiguing as if you carry it on your feet and it has to go up and down all day and move so much more terrain. So stress on the body is much higher if the weight is on your feet. Story number 2 happened when I was a lot younger. It was an organized hike and I was supposed to bring a backpack with a certain amount of weight in it and carry or use hiking boots. So I grabbed a pair of hiking boots that I'd never used before, and they were a very stiff hiking boot. We went out there and logged somewhere over 20 miles in the day, but it wasn't very long into the hike. Maybe by 5 miles, I had blisters so big that there was no way they were gonna survive the day, and they ended up ripping off shortly thereafter. I continued to hike in excruciating pain all day long, just basically scared to see what was going on inside my shoe. I knew I was bleeding. I knew that I had massive blisters. When I finally got to camp, 22 miles in, I believe is what it was, I pulled the shoes off. And again, trust me, this was like one of the most painful days I've ever had. The bottom of my shoe or boot was completely covered in blood. The next morning, I couldn't even put those pair of boots on. I ended up hiking the last 5 miles in a pair of sandals. So my takeaway from this was make sure that you have a shakeout day or a few shakeout days where you're wearing the boot or shoes to make sure your feet are agreeing with them. For those of you that don't know what a shakeout day is, it's testing out your equipment on a day hike or a quick overnighter so that you're not finding out any surprises when you go out to execute your bigger, longer trip in the backcountry. So those two stories, as well as stories that I'm not gonna tell you right now, all boil down to one main concept, and that is do not overshoe yourself. What does that mean? Let's dive into that because that will help you pick the right shoe for you. All right, so for starters, let's get a few shoes up here on the table. These are my winter boots. These are a pair of newer boots, and these are a pair of brand new trailrunners. Between all these shoes up here, I'm hoping to explain the principles of what overshoeing yourself really, really means. We've got a couple of different options here, and I just wanted to touch on the differences in the weights of these shoes. Now, you do have to pay attention when you're buying shoes to know if they're talking about a single shoe or a pair of shoes. If you're comparing one boot compared to a set of shoes, that's a big deal. So this shoe right here is 1 pound, 10 ounces, 9.9 ounces, versus this mid right here is 1 pound, 1 ounce, 1.5 ounces. So what is that? 8.5 ounces lighter in one shoe between these two. So between the pair of these, that's 1 full pound off of your feet. Going back to that principle of don't overshoe yourself, the lighter you can get your shoes for your trip, the happier or less fatigued you're going to be on that trip. And something that's related very closely to this would be stiffness. Now, if you're going into terrain that is just absolutely rugged, maybe you're not even going on trails, stiffness can be a bigger factor to protect your feet. Or if you're carrying really heavy loads, like let's say you're a sportsman, sometimes people like a stiffer boot. But going back to my initial story, I had a super stiff boot, which caused all of my blister problems. If you want blister problems, get a stiff boot. That's all I could say on that. The stiffer your boot, the more you run a risk of having it abrade and cause a lot of extra rubbing and issues, as long as the fit is the same with your foot. So you might be asking, well, that's fine and dandy, but this obviously doesn't have the same ankle protection as this. So that is a major factor. For you, you need to know what is the minimal amount of ankle protection that you're comfortable with or trained to use. If you're never getting out on trails, you may need something like this that gives full ankle support and has some stiffness to it. If you're someone who's getting out a lot, you might be able to get away with something like this or a slightly more minimal option like this. So this is where knowing yourself and knowing what you're capable of is really, really important. All right, so let's talk about waterproofing. Do you need a Gore-Tex liner or some other kind of waterproofing in your boot? To me, again, don't overshoe yourself. If you do not need a water membrane, don't get it. So all of these boots have it. This pair of trailrunners does not. To me, with this particular piece, it's not needed. I'm typically gonna be hiking on trails. I don't have dew or moisture on the plants around. I'm not getting that into my shoe. And if it's raining, most likely when I'm wearing this pair of shoes, I'm also wearing shorts or something like that to move across more country quickly. So for that reason, this piece is not a piece that I would ever consider getting in a Gore-Tex or waterproof membrane. These other pieces, there's a good chance I'm gonna be crossing creeks. There's a good chance I'm gonna be going off trail and walking through brush that might be wet or damp in the mornings. And so I do get a Gore-Tex liner. But if you don't know for sure that you need that Gore-Tex liner, don't get it because it will heat up your foot, and heat is what also creates blisters. So I'm gonna get less blisters in a piece like this that breathes really well than a piece like this that has that Gore-Tex liner and creates more heat inside of the shoe. Another important factor in boot or shoe selection is the time of year that you're going out and if you're gonna need insulation or not. These are my winter boots. They have an aerogel insulation in them. They're rated for negative such and such degrees. Don't read into that too much, by the way. But they're gonna have a thicker sole to insulate you on the bottom half. They're also gonna have insulation through this part of the boot and be a waterproof shoe. Now, I'm using this piece only when I'm hiking in the snow. Don't get something with insulation if you're not going into those late seasons. You might think, well, the top of the mountain might be cold even in the summer. That's really not a great option. What I would suggest for that scenario is to change out your socks. So if you're in the market for a new pair of socks, I do have a video we can link up here. I am a big proponent of Darn Tough socks, and now those are available to our Live Ultralight members. So go join that membership. If you're not a member, you can now get the best possible prices on Darn Tough socks with rebates. And if you're buying or spending on the website right now, there is a big giveaway going on this month of May. So join the membership if you're not a member, and you can get your socks there. Back to the boots, however, though, make sure you're not overshoeing yourself. Only use insulation when you need it. Otherwise, if it's something like a 3-season scenario, you might be able to just switch out socks and keep your feet dry. Maybe the caveat there is if you're in that late 3rd season and you're expecting to get your feet quite wet day after day, you may want to go with something like an insulated boot again, even if you're not in snow, because once a waterproof membrane gets wet and the inside of your boot gets wet, it will not get dry on your trip, which means you're gonna have cold feet the rest of that trip. Whereas insulation, even though your feet might be wet, can get warmer or stay warmer inside of that waterproof membrane. All right, so before I get to my personal recommendations, we have 2 more things to cover. One is about getting the right fit, and the other is about when to change out your shoe. So right here is what I would consider a worn out shoe. It's the same model as this. I'm gonna move this. This is the Salomon Sense Ride Force. This has been an awesome shoe for me in trail running and hiking. But you'll see as you kind of look through these, let's say it's along the side here, there's a ton of stress markers in here, and there's a little bit of sign. I've got a little hole right there. Obviously this pair of shoes is now retired from the trail, but I've still worn it sometimes on a daily basis. So when do you know when to change out the shoe? The biggest thing I would say is when you start to lose support in the shoe. So I'm a little bit bigger, I'm about 200 pounder, and I can tell when the shoe starts to break down that I'm not getting the same support or stability in the shoe. I can also tell that I'm kind of walking on the outside of my feet. So if you know your own stance and where you wear out shoes, you can watch for that. So this shoe is much more broken down than this shoe, meaning when I put pressure on here, it kind of tilts out and starts to roll easier to the outside. Those are the type of things that you're gonna want. Obviously holes, wearing out soles, but to me, I start to retire shoes when I can feel the shoe is breaking down. And a lot of times with the amount of miles that I'm going, I'll start to actually feel like my knee will start to flare up or something like that. And that's been a really good indicator for me to change to a new pair of shoes. So some of you might be asking, why is there not a pair of Ultras on the table? Ultras are such a popular pair of shoes for a lot of thru hikers. And the reason is they just flat out don't work for me. So really what I'm talking about is finding the right fit for you. Obviously you can try shoes on, you can wear them, you can see if there's like hot spots or rubbing, but it can be a little bit more of a challenging thing to get the right fit. time in the shoe is really, really important. I would never suggest you switch to a brand you've never worn before or wear a completely different style of shoe without testing that piece out. You'll notice a similar theme here, and I'm not like I'm sponsored by Salomon, but if you wanted to send me some shoes, Salomon, I would definitely take them. Every pair of shoes on this table are Salomon's. Sometimes attaching yourself to a brand that works for you is a good way to help you dial in the fit. It's kind of the easy way to help you dial in the fit. Not that I'm opposed to trying other shoes, but I just know from my own experiences that Salomon's are going to work for me. And if you follow that principle of never overshoeing yourself, you're also gonna put yourself in a much better position to get a comfortable fit. This is gonna fit and work for a lot more people than say this boot right here, just out of the sheer factor that this is a heavier, more stiff boot than this piece right here. That flexibility in this means it's going to be more comfortable, even if it's not a perfect fit. All right, so you guys have probably been wondering what shoe is my personal favorite, and you might have guessed this or seen this in previous videos, but I log almost all of my miles these days with this Salomon SenseRide Trail Runner. It's really light, it's really flexible, and it is crazy comfortable. Keeps my feet really well ventilated on the trail, and as long as I'm not carrying over like 30 pounds, I have a ton of confidence that I'm gonna have enough support and my ankles and knees are gonna stay very safe on the trail. Since I'm an ultralight backpacker and do a little bit of trail running, it just makes the absolute most sense for me to stick with the Trail Runner. Now, I do sometimes wear gaiters to go up and around the upper part of this to keep debris from getting in. That might be one of the concerns you have with something like this, but really, I log enough miles that my ankles, knees, and joints are very, very well vetted to be able to use a minimalist style shoe on the trail. I do not recommend you jump straight to this if you don't have some experience and miles. That's definitely how people do get injured, is if they're not doing any training themselves, they could get injured by going to something this minimal, but this is my shoe of choice. And obviously with Salomon, I have a lot of confidence in them. So we will put a link down below for you to check out this exact pair of shoes. Now, for the bulk of you that might think this is a little bit minimalist, let's talk about these two boots here. If it was me, what I'm gonna personally recommend is going with something like this mid. It's gonna give you some level of ankle support. Maybe you'll still develop a little bit more on the trail as far as stability in your own ankle, unless you know for a fact that your ankles are weak and you have a lot of concerns about that. Speaking of logging miles, we have an event that we just launched. It's the UL Member 100 Challenge. You can join us to train and prepare to go execute your dream hike. We're gonna be training throughout the summer along with other members of our membership to execute this. It's gonna be a lot of fun. It's gonna be very interactive. There's a framework that goes along with it. There's a bunch of free gear that you'll get when you sign up as well. So go check that out. And also, if you sign up this month, you'll get additional entries into that giveaway that we already talked about. So remember, do not overshoe yourself when you head out to start backpacking. You'll be way more comfortable and way more happy at the end of the day. If you want a little bit more content like this, click the link over here and you can watch the next video of why I stopped using this pair of boots right here, and we'll see you guys out on the trail.